Who do you think you are? Or a more appropriate question is, who do you think you are? That's what we're going to focus on today, the self. And there are three components of self: self-concept, agent self, and public self. Self-concept, these are things you know about yourself: how tall you are, what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you like, what you don't like. Agent self, that's part of the self that takes care of business. Okay, when you got to do something really important, or you sit down and study, or that's your agent self, or you need to have a goal you need to achieve, or something you need to do at the end of the day. That's your agent self. And then there's your public self. That's your public self, how you act in public around other people. Charles Cooley, a sociologist, came up with the concept looking glass self. Looking glass self. As a child goes through the world, interacting with people, they reflect back their images of how people see them. And what Cooley is saying is your sense of self comes from family, culture, and socialization agents. And within culture includes the media, educational system, personal values, all those type of issues come in there. And also socialization agents, police officers, school teachers, and various other authority figures. And to a certain extent, the self is fluid. In other words, you work yourself back. This goes back to George Kelly. Of course, George Kelly said that humans are hypothesis makers and players of multiple roles. He was the head of the clinical psychology department at Ohio State in the 1950s. But think about that. Personal construct there. People are hypothesis makers and players of multiple roles. And what is a hypothesis maker? They're always trying to figure things out. Kind of an untested theory, untested idea. And then also trying to play different roles based upon the situation. You play one role around your family members, you play another role at home. If you have kids, you play a different role, you play another role at work. Okay, that's what I say, self is fluid. And you play your role, you adapt those roles, or people adapt their roles based upon the situation they're in. And we're talking about social comparison theory. Leon Festinger, we talked about him earlier, cognitive dissonance. But Leon Festinger came up with social comparing. Other people go through life comparing themselves to other people. You ever envy somebody that had one of your friends that they did something really good that you couldn't do, or maybe they envied you for something or another? Okay, you're comparing yourself, or is so-and-so better than me, or so-and-so better looking than me, or so. People are oftentimes constantly comparing themselves to each other. And one of the previous videos on my schemas and scripts, now it's talking about self-schemas. Self-schema, what is a self-schema? These are things you know about yourself. Okay, and within that self-schema comes, we're talking about self-concept, things you know about yourself, but then comes self-esteem. Okay, how you feel about you. There are people out there who actually don't like themselves. You probably heard that phrase, high self-esteem. That means a person likes themselves or feels good about themselves, but low self-esteem means someone doesn't really feel good about themselves. They don't like themselves. Another aspect comes up around that is reflective self-appraisal. Reflective self-appraisal. In other words, beliefs about how other people respond to us. You ever meet somebody who thinks they're all that and they're not? Okay, in other words, their reflective self-appraisal may be a little off, or someone thinks they're really respected and they are. Okay, how do I like myself or appraise myself based upon how people respond to me in a way that kind of goes back to looking glass self. Then we also talk about self-presentation, how you present yourself. Okay, you ever heard the phrase, so-and-so's a wonderful person till you get to know her? Okay, in other words, her self-presentation is really good, at least for strangers, but then once you get to know them, and we're all like that to a certain extent. You have a public self, or you try to put on your best act and you smile, but then you have your private self, okay, or you may not be as nice, or those type of things. And your siblings probably know you more than anybody else. Okay, also within that self-appraisal comes how we present ourselves, but also how we manage our impressions. Okay, you ever hear the phrase so-and-so lost face? In other words, they lost control, that probably impressed people, or maybe someone did something inappropriate and the same thing, and I caught myself. The impression, man, how you manage yourself, or how you got in public. I mean, certain clothes you will not go outside with, okay, or especially if you go in a meeting or get an important interview with important people, you respond, you basically present yourself differently, and that's what you manage your impression based upon your situation. Irving Goffman came off with the dramaturgical approach. In other words, what he's saying is back to Shakespeare, the world is a stage and everyone plays that part. The world is a stage. In other words, talking about social interaction be viewed as a play, with sittings and scripts and roles and props. I mean, think about that. I mean, before you go out, or you ever go to an outing or a date or whatever, you make sure everything's right. You get the hair just right, you get everything else there, you have the right color clothes. Maybe you look in the mirror and say, well, maybe let me change and do something else. Okay, you're trying to sit up here, and then you have your scenery, the situation you're in, and your props, other things, you have your car and all those other things kind of help you with that management. Think about the world as a stage. And within that, you have what they call people who are high versus low self-monitors. Okay, low self-monitor versus high self. This person who is always aware of how other people view them out there in the world. You have a spot, oh man, versus low self-monitors, they get up out of bed and go to work, smell bad, doesn't matter. They don't really monitor themselves very much. And all that indirectly ties into public self-consciousness. In other words, to a certain extent, you believe how you believe others pay attention to you. Are people noticing you? Are people not noticing you? You ever walk in the room and right away you know that you're not in the right place or you're not welcome? Okay, how do you know? How do you know? That's what we're looking at. And the question is, how do you know that? And that's based upon, once again, how you perceive those social settings.